welcome back, and honored to have back with us today on this almost New Year's Day. Auron MacIntyre is back with us, the author of an interesting book called The Total State and How Liberal Democracies Become Tyrannies. He's also the host of the Auron MacIntyre Show, which is a show, and then he has the column for Blaze News. So, pretty busy guy, and in between that, he sleeps, kind of, sort of. Hi, Auron. How you doing, bud?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
You bet. The passing of Jimmy Carter, really an amazing person. How would you rate his presidency?
Well, I think a lot of people have mixed opinions of Jimmy Carter. As a man, they think that he is a good person, but ultimately these presidency led us to a lot of difficulty, and obviously the American people saw that, and that's why Ronald Reagan ended up taking over. He's also remembered a lot for what he did after his presidency. And once again, it's a mixed bag. He's involved in some good causes, but some very left-wing causes that ultimately caused harm. So again, I think a lot of people respect his personal life while maybe feeling that his public life was less than always on track.
Yeah, I think that sums it up. I mean, there was one positive thing that came out of his presidency, and that was the peace deal between Israel and Egypt. What do you think about that?
Obviously, his legacy there, again, is once again mixed. A lot of people, of course, would like to see more and more countries sue for peace with Israel, look for a way to coexist with them. And ultimately, at that time, that was a huge deal. But Jimmy Carter's moved on to write entire books about how he feels like Israel has no business in certain areas inside of the Middle East, including in Gaza. And so, once again, I think we can look and say a good piece of work done, but then others look at his legacy and say later on he seems to have changed his tune.
Okay, I'm going to come to a couple of things. Do you understand what President-elect Trump's trying to do with Panama Canal?
I really think it's interesting that he has done some trolling a little bit on the internet, as the kids call it. He has talked about greater kind of America there, America stretching its influence into Canada. Maybe Justin Trudeau would just be a good governor there, stretching its influence all the way back down to the Panama Canal and asserting influence there. I think ultimately Trump recognizes that so much of the world has been putting America on the back foot, that we've been thinking about what we can do for them, the ways in which we have to bend over backwards to be politically correct to all of these nations. He wants people to know that America is in control, that ultimately the United States is going to be a leader. It's going to be looking for economic opportunities. He's talked about buying Greenland at times, right? So I think in some ways this is Trump joking, but in other ways he wants world leaders to know that he's thinking about America first, that he's thinking about the opportunities and the future of America, not just sitting around making apologies for other nations that may or may not feel like we owe them something.
Were you surprised to find out how involved China is with the Panama Canal?
No, China has been attempting to increase its sphere of influence for many years. It's interesting because ultimately I feel like China as a civilization is often one that takes a few steps forward and then one back. They're not necessarily what one would think of as a global superpower in the same sense that people might have thought of the United States or even Russia. But ultimately, they recognize that they want to compete, and that means having access to trade routes, controlling different aspects of the global trade system. Ultimately, China's looking to break the United States' monopoly on global trade, and if they're going to do that, they need to work their way into all of these key aspects of our global trade system, and something like the Panama Canal is just one of them.
So back to Greenland, what attracts President Trump to Greenland? Is it military strategy?
Again, I don't know how much of it is serious, but if I may be wrong about this, but I believe there are rare earth minerals there, that there are valuable minerals to be mined out of Greenland. That could be part of it. It could simply be the fact that that's an opportunity to expand the idea of Americans' zone of control and new opportunities and frontiers for the United States. Let's be honest, the United States is always at its best when it's conquering some kind of frontier. But ultimately, I'm not sure if this is a geopolitical or resource-driven maneuver, or ultimately, again, it's him simply engaging in conversation, letting the world know the United States is back. The United States is a power that is expanding, asserting its influence. We are no longer one that is simply shrinking away from different opportunities.
His trolling of Canada, and in particular teasing Prime Minister Trudeau becoming governor, it looks like the Canadians kind of like the idea only because it gets rid of Trudeau. What do you think?
Yeah, it's been said very often that Justin Trudeau is on his last legs here, that he's a dead man walking politically. His party simply doesn't have the votes. He's been in power, obviously, for a very long time, but just the downward slide of Canadian well-being and culture has really brought people to the point where they're done with Justin Trudeau. Now, the only problem with being done with Justin Trudeau is the Conservative Party in Canada makes the Republican Party in the United States look wildly conservative and right-wing. Like the left, the conservatives in Canada are at best moderate Democrats on a really good day. But they are, of course, superior to Justin Trudeau. There are many Canadians who have joked and said, you will be welcomed as liberators if you come into Canada. Again, I think a good deal of joking, but ultimately a lot of Canadians recognize that many of the policies, including ones like large-scale mass immigration along the lines of the stuff that's being pushed by many on the, well, I should say, the tech right, like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and David Sachs, it has not helped their country. They have not become economically competitive. It has only worsened kind of the social cohesion and the cost of living problems in Canada. And ultimately, they are rejecting this idea, even while we are now somehow entertaining it here in the United States.
Wow, it's kind of interesting. So over to, it's going to be interesting because this next couple of weeks is going to be a lot going on in the United States. I'm sure there's going to be a state funeral for the former president. Mixed into that will be the vote for the speakership in the House over Mike Johnson. Do you think he survives?
I would hope not. And ultimately, Mike Johnson was himself a response to a insufficiently responsive speaker previously. But ultimately, we need to send a message that this kind of behavior is unacceptable. Johnson has failed to move things forward. We need someone who's going to be assertive, who's going to make big moves. And Johnson has been very clear that he's incredibly reactive. He might be a good person on his, again, personally, in a Jimmy Carter-esque mold, but he simply does not seem to have the fortitude necessary to lead. I mean, it took the guy the better part of a day to finally define what a man and a woman is. I'm glad he finally did that, but the very fact that he had to be kind of drug out on social media to tell the truth on a fact like that is pretty concerning. I don't feel like he's the guy who's going to carry Trump's agenda forward, and I think it's really important that somebody does that. Trump has shown himself willing to work with Johnson, and perhaps ultimately he can discipline him into doing what is necessary, but the signs don't look good right now.
Okay, there's only one problem with that. We're only a few days away from this, and guess what? I haven't heard anybody's name being floated. Nobody.
Yeah, ultimately, I would like to see somebody like a Thomas Massie put into a position like that, but that might just be me wishful thinking. Ultimately, we might be stuck with Mike Johnson, and that might be what we have to work with. Like I said, I do think that there is a possibility he could be disciplined into that role. He does seem very susceptible to public pressure, and if Trump and the rest of the MAGA base can continue to encourage him to make the right decisions, ultimately that might be the way you have to go. But down the road, it would be best if people started thinking about the future of the party. If you don't have a guy better than Mike Johnson on the bench, then you might want to start thinking about why.
Okay. But as far as January 3rd is concerned, it looks like he has no opposition.
Yeah, again, like I said, I don't think that as we see it now, there's going to be someone like Massie put into a position like this. I just think he has too many enemies. I don't know if anyone else is willing to throw their hat in the ring. Once again, unfortunately for the GOP and America at large, there seems to be really very little interest in leadership. And so we have a scenario where Johnson might be the only one available to fill that role. But we will just simply have to wait and see, I guess, at this point.
A lot of speculation that on January 20th at 2 o'clock, according to President-elect Trump, the new administration will be engaged. And backing that is a host of, ERs, executive orders, most of which will be dealing with the border. Do you know how, or any of the details of what those may be?
I've seen a lot floated around. It's not exactly clear. I mean, a large amount of President Trump's policies were executive orders at the border. That was a critical part. That's why so much about Joe Biden's, oh, well, we have to pass all these laws. We need additional funding. Well, it would be great to have additional funding for the Border Patrol and all of these different things. But ultimately, that's not the case. President Trump was able to bring down border entries significantly through simple applications of policy, and that could be reinstated once he's moved in. I know Stephen Miller has been moving aggressively to make these kind of options available. We have, I think, now an understanding for both the Trump administration and the American people, again, after this kind of recent online battle over the issue of H-1B visas and legal and illegal immigration, that this is what President Trump was given a mandate to do, and I think he knows that. I know he feels that the thing people are most disappointed about is that we never got the wall and we didn't get those lasting changes in the structure. Now, ultimately, executive orders aren't lasting changes. They don't stick around. They can be immediately repealed by the next president, these kind of things. And so it would necessarily move into a legislative realm, and especially a bureaucratic realm. He needs to remake the bureaucracies of these agencies, very importantly, if he wants lasting change. But the executive orders are a good way to get the ball rolling. That first 100 days is, of course, the most critical in any presidency.
I guess over the weekend or late last week, the judge ruled against President Biden selling the wall parts. That's pretty significant, don't you think?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of background on that particular issue. I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, they were trying to sell them off, and he stopped it. So I can't help but think that's going to be a good deal. What do you think about RFK Jr.? Does he get confirmed, and what will he do?
Yeah, ultimately, it's interesting to see if RFK does get confirmed. There's been a lot of talk about this guy being a crazy, these kind of things, but there hasn't been the level of pushback that we saw to someone like a Matt Gaetz. It seems like ultimately the left is not quite as invested in this position or trying to destroy it in the way that others are, and more importantly, there's not as much pushback from moderate Republicans, even though RFK is, of course, a Democrat or is at least an independent. He is not a traditional conservative in any way. But I know a lot of people on the right are very concerned about health. They're very concerned about what is in our food. They're very concerned about the way in which we apply, drugs and the way we make these things in the United States and how it compares to other countries. I think RFK is somebody who does genuinely care about this issue deeply, even if I very much disagree with him on other issues. And so if you're going to put him in one position in the administration, this would be it. And so it seems like he's very interested. We've already heard about removing fluoride from the water, looking at the different ingredients that go into food that are having negative impacts on people in the United States. I think that's the kind of thing you can expect him to review once he gets placed in that position, if he is confirmed.
As you know, he went after Fauci with both feet and wrote the book and the whole 9 yards and called him out, especially for the vaccine and everything. Couple of questions there. Does Fauci get a pardon from President Biden? And if so, would that be a form of admittance?
Yeah, I don't think they'll ever admit what they actually did here, of course, and anybody handing out the pardons will simply say, oh, well, we're only really worried about the Trump administration coming after him. Trump has vowed to go after his enemies, and so that's the only reason we're doing it, not because there is actually an wrongdoing. We're just protecting him from a corrupted process, which, of course, is hilarious because the corrupted process is exactly what Joe Biden and his administration has wielded against all of the people who worked for Donald Trump. We've seen so many people, Steve Bannon, others, who are unjustly placed in prison or have to pay out large amounts of legal fees to defend themselves from a Department of Justice that has just been horrible under Joe Biden. Now, ultimately, I think they probably won't issue a pardon, but it is possible. I would not rule it out. But the way they would spin it is, oh, well, we're just avoiding the corruption of Trump. I think to all of us, it would say what we already know very loud and clear, that Fauci was a monster and did terrible things and is trying to dodge the consequences.
What ultimately happens to Matt Gaetz?
Well, he's already accepted a position on, I believe, OAN. It sounds like he's already got a future in kind of the broadcasting punditry sphere. That seems to be where he's going personally. Professionally, I'm not sure if they'll continue any form of investigation. I mean, once people tend to be out of the light, once they're no longer politically active, these things tend to kind of fall off, which I imagine is what Gates was ultimately hoping. I have no idea about the credibility of any of these allegations. I have no particular special knowledge. I know that they would send just about anybody and say just about anything to destroy someone who they think is aligned with Donald Trump, but ultimately that doesn't mean that Matt Gaetz didn't do something wrong. So we're simply probably going to have to see. I would imagine that once he is out of specific power, once there's no longer a chance to him being an attorney general or sitting on any committees, then they will probably let him fade into the background working in the punditry business, but we'll have to see.
How do you think President Biden will be remembered?
A disaster. There's really no way to see it otherwise. I mean, the entire nation knows that life got worse under him. He's repudiated very seriously at the ballot box. More or less every left-winger at this point has even agreed that he was a disaster in some way, shape, or form, whether it was the hiding of his quality of health, his lack of mental acuity, his inability to get many of the left-wing priorities that they wanted done, the way in which the economy faltered under him. There are many, many things that the left are pretty much willing to hang on Biden and walk away as well. That was always the value of Joe Biden. He could do a lot of bad things that the left wanted done anyway, but then you could just blame it on a guy who was obviously senile, obviously on his way out politically and everything else. So I don't think he's going to be remembered fondly by either the left or the right.
Do you think on his way out he goes after the people that made him step aside?
Well, it's interesting. We've seen these little digs here and there, right? Like right. It seems like regularly Biden will kind of throw in comments. He will say things at inopportune times. You always wonder if it's because he's he really is just that senile, or if he's working in digs at those that kind of took him out. What does he have to lose, ultimately, is the real question. He doesn't need to get elected again. He's not going to have another job in Democratic politics. He's not going to be remembered as some kind of scion of the left.
Right.
So it would make sense to me that he would go after those people, but it may not. I mean, again, I don't think he's firing all cylinders. It would have to probably be his wife, Jill, that encouraged him to do that kind of thing. And I'm not sure if they're willing to have that fight on the way out. But again, once again, we'll have to wait and see.
Okay, good to see you. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, check out his book. It's called The Total State, How Liberal Democracies Become Tyrannies. And there's a picture of the cover of the book. And where can they get this, Aaron?
You can see it on Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. Of course, it's on Amazon, or you can pick it up at your local bookstore.
Okay. It's called Total State, How Liberal Democracies Become Tyrannies. I think you'll find it to be fairly insightful. Good to see you, friend. Thanks. Let's stay connected.
Thanks again.